there's been a trend going around YouTube and TikTok, and it's all about being the main character of your story. And I can kind of see where this came from. It really sounds empowering, but it can actually lead to something very dangerous for our spiritual walk. And so today I want to talk to you about why you shouldn't be the main character of your life. So whenever I have been watching all of these videos about being the main character of your life, there is kind of this recurring theme that's all about me. It's everything to do with me, my needs, my wants, my comfort, and everybody else is secondary to that. And so I want to talk to you about why this idea of being the main character of your life is really dangerous for Christian women. It sounds, like I said, empowering, but under the root of it is just pride. I was reading through the book of Esther the last couple of weeks, and I really found some shocking similarities between this trend of being a main character and the villain of the story of Esther, Haman. And I want to walk through them with you today so that we can see the difference between the world's view of maybe this idea of self-care or really putting yourself first versus what the Bible says and the dangers and the warnings that it actually gives on pride and the downfall that eventually happens to people who are all about themselves. So we all know the story of Esther, and in the story, there's a Jewish girl who, by order of the king, has to go through kind of a beauty pageant of sorts, and whoever the winner is of this beauty pageant becomes his next queen. So she's a Jewish girl named Esther, and now she's been chosen to be the queen, and she's in the palace, and the king's second in command, the prime minister, for lack of a better term, has decided that he is going to go against the Jewish people, and he puts out an edict that basically annihilates the entire Jewish nation. It gives rights to the people to just go in and destroy this entire nation. She has to be brave and really make a difference using her position to save her people. But I want to talk to you today about Haman, who is this prime minister, and really the downfall that came for him really started with him believing that he was the main character of this story. Like I said, being the main character, this trend that's going on really is rooted in pride. And so today I want to talk to you about specific lessons that we can take from Haman and from this main character trend and avoid this idea of pride that can really be our downfall. So the first lesson that we can take away from the dangers of this main character mentality is the idea that pride is not a stable emotion. So in the story of Esther, we know that Esther had invited Haman and the king to a banquet in order to tell the king about this situation that was happening. And in chapter 5, verse 9, Haman is leaving the banquet, and it says, Haman was a happy man as he left the banquet, but when he saw Mordecai sitting at the palace gate, not standing up or trembling nervously before him, he became furious. So I want you to see that whenever we view ourselves as the main character of our story, that pride that's the foundation is very unstable. Haman's joy depended on the actions of other people. So whenever he was being honored, assumingly honored by the queen by attending this banquet, his pride was high, but as soon as he saw Mordecai not bowing to him, his emotions were dashed, and he was just very unstable in the way that he was thinking. And I think that this is something, whenever we look at this trend of being the main character, this trend really makes emotions fragile because you're relying on outside validation. Whenever you are just seeking the approval of other people, maybe you're posting things to make your life look like it's better than it is, or you're photoshopping excessively, or whatever it is, and you're wanting to be the center of everyone's attention. In your life, this idea of being the main character really ends up hurting you, because even though it feels empowering to begin with, like you are always setting yourself up to be first, always making sure that your needs are met first, what you're ultimately doing is putting the control into other people's hands for what validates you. So whenever you're seeing yourself through the eyes of other people, you begin to want that outside validation, that outside esteem. And truly, our confidence has to be based in something way stronger and more immovable than that. The second danger of pride is that it makes you think that you're the most important person in the room. So, as we know, later on in this chapter, Haman goes home and he's telling his wife and his friends, and he's saying things like, Queen Esther invited me and the king to come to this banquet, and it was only me and the king that she invited to dine. It was always about him. In fact, even the king was kind of a secondary figure in his mind. And his boasting really mirrors this self-centered mindset of being the main character. So often we think that people are talking about us, or that they have all these opinions of us, when really they're not even thinking about us at all. Everyone's just thinking about themselves, right? And so if we have this mindset that we're the main character, we start to think that we are more important, that we are maybe more valuable. Haman's boasting really mirrors this self-centered mindset that is part of the world today. And as believers, we're called to live in a different way. We're called to be transformed by the renewing of our minds. And as we begin to break away from this kind of self-centered mindset, what we realize is that the Christian life actually requires the exact opposite. So in Philippians chapter 2, I'm going to read verses 3 and 4 for you. It says, "Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit, but in humility consider others better than yourselves. Each of you should look not only to your own interests, but also to the interest of other people." And it goes on in the next verses to talk about how your attitude should be the same as Christ Jesus. Jesus was the perfect example of humility, and we're called to clothe ourselves in that. We're not called to be the main character of our story. We're called to let God be the author of our story, and we are just here as his people, really living out the desire that he has for us. I can't think of a greater person who has ever lived than Jesus, and ultimately he modeled humility better than any other person on earth. And because of the way that the kingdom works, he was exalted and by his humility. The next reason why you should avoid being caught in this trap of being the main character of your life is that pride makes you impatient. So Haman, as he left this banquet and he's talking to his friends and he's boasting about everything, remember the edict that had been issued was already in effect. There was a specific day that people were going to be able to attack the Jewish people, and it was already in place. It was already going to happen. But Haman, as he's talking to his wife and his friends, and he's telling them about how Mordecai won't bow to him, and he's so angry, and it's all about him, and why won't Mordecai bow to him? His family and friends encourage him to actually expedite the execution of Mordecai to the next day. It made him so impatient that he couldn't just wait for his plans. Just like this main character thinking really pushes for instant gratification. You know, I want that outfit, or I need that top seller, or all of these things that can come up whenever we think that we deserve everything right away. Haman blew that to complete huge proportions, where he couldn't even wait for the edict that he himself had scheduled. Right? He had scheduled this edict for it to happen. It was, I think, about 8 months away in the future, and that wasn't enough for him. His pride made him completely impatient. And I think that patience is something that is a virtue that has been lost. I think in this age of instant gratification and instant knowledge and instant pay and all these things, you can really fall into the trap of losing the ability to be patient. And that's something that ultimately hinders us, because we need to be able to trust God's timing instead of rushing for self-gratification. There's so many stories in the Bible of people who were impatient that didn't wait for God's timing. I think about Abraham and Sarah whenever they were waiting for their son. And I think that this is something that is lost on us in this day and age because of our culture, because of all of these great technological advances that we've had, that we've made, that make things so accessible to us, that make things instant for us, right? We need to get back to the point where we say, I am able to wait and I'm not going to fall for this idea of instant gratification. The next danger of pride and being the main character of our lives is that it clouds our judgment. So if we go back to the story of Haman, we know that he had set up those gallows for Mordecai, and he's going back into the palace to ask the king to, pretty much destroy this man. Unbeknownst to him, in the middle of the night, the king wasn't able to sleep. And he is thinking about, ways for him to get him back to sleep. And he has these books of the records of his reign brought into him. And the king finds out that years earlier, Mordecai had actually saved his life against a threat. And he now wants to honor Mordecai. That he found out that nothing was done for Mordecai. And so he calls for Haman to come in, and he asks Haman, what should be done for someone who the king really wishes to honor? Now, in his pride and main character mentality, Haman, of course, is thinking with clouded judgment, and he's thinking to himself, who else could the king honor except for me? Who higher than me would the king want to honor? This is something that is so sad because there's nothing in his mind that even thinks that there's any possibility that any other person could possibly be the one that the king would want to honor. And Haman goes on to give this elaborate plan of how the king can honor this person, thinking it's himself, right? And he says, put the king's robes on him and let him ride the king's horse and parade him around in the city and have everyone honor him, not knowing that the person that the king wanted to honor was Mordecai, the man that Haman wanted to destroy. Haman assumed that everything and everyone revolved around him, and that's what this trend does is it distorts our reality. It really stops us from being able to judge clearly the things that are going on around us and having discernment and really understanding that this world is not about us. It's about Jesus. It's about telling people about Jesus. It's about ministering to other people and putting other people above ourselves. Haman had no clue how to do that because pride had distorted his reality so much. The last red flag that I saw in these couple of chapters about pride was that pride always leads to a downfall. So if we keep reading, we find out that eventually the king finds out what Haman was doing, and unfortunately for Haman, some messengers come in and let him know that the gallows that he had set up for Mordecai were ready right in front of the king, who just realized that Mordecai had saved his life. And in his fury of everything that had happened, the king decides to hang Haman on the gallows that he had prepared for Mordecai. Haman's pride eventually led to his destruction, and this is definitely a warning for us against self-exaltation. It's not about what we can get out of something or how our needs or wants are being met. It's truly about choosing humility and living out God's purpose. So I really want you to remember in all of this that while Haman is a perfect example of what not to do, Jesus is the example of what to do. He had every reason to exalt himself, and he chose humility instead. When we reject pride and embrace his example, we start to step out of this main character mindset, and we end up finding joy in serving other people. That is the life that Jesus lived. He lowered himself, he humbled himself to save us because it was God's purpose. And we can choose to have that mindset versus this main character mindset where we decide that God is the author of our story and Jesus is the main character of it, and we're here to live out his purposes. So, are there areas of your life where pride is creeping in? Let's reject this idea of the main character mindset and choose humility instead. I would love it if you would share this message with a friend, like and subscribe if you want to see more videos like this. Be on the lookout for my newest book coming out soon. It's called The Ultimate Influencer: Lessons from Queen Esther, and it really dives deeper into some of these themes. So make sure to subscribe so you don't miss it, and I will see you next time. Have a great week.